For millions of years, our ancestors walked the earth bare, no fur, no fabric, and no protection from the world around them. But then almost 170,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. Humans began to create clothing, a single invention that would change everything. It wasn't just about staying warm. It was about survival, identity, and the birth of culture itself. From the freezing winds of the Ice Age to the dawn of civilization, this simple act, covering our bodies, reshaped the story of humanity. You're watching Evolution History Hub, where we uncover the turning points that made us who we are. If you love exploring the mysteries of our past, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a story from history's hidden side. For millions of years, our ancestors walked the earth bare, skinned, relying on nothing but the warmth of the sun and the shelter of trees. Long before civilization, before language, and before the notion of modesty, early humans survived as naked apes. Their skin, unlike that of other primates, had evolved to lose most of its fur, a biological shift that puzzled scientists for generations. Why would an animal give up its natural protection? And if losing fur was a step forward, what drove us, tens of thousands of years later, to cover ourselves again, this time with clothing? Roughly 170,000 years ago, humans began creating garments, a pivotal adaptation that changed not only how we lived, but how we thought, migrated, and evolved. This was not a trivial fashion choice. It was a survival mechanism born from desperation, ingenuity, and environmental upheaval. To understand the invention of clothing is to understand a turning point in human history, one that shaped our bodies, our societies, and even our sense of self. Either naked beginning losing our fur, our story begins about 1.2 million to 3 million years ago, during the era of Homo erectus, a species that marks a significant step in our lineage. Unlike their primate cousins, these early humans began to lose their dense body hair. Several evolutionary hypotheses attempt to explain why. One leading theory is thermoregulation. As early humans moved out of forested habitats and into open savannas, they were exposed to the blistering sun and needed to stay cool while hunting and traveling long distances. Fur, which traps heat, became a liability. Instead, humans evolved a unique cooling system: sweating. Millions of tiny sweat glands across the skin allowed heat to escape efficiently. But this came at a cost. With fur gone, our ancestors were left exposed to cold nights, harsh winds, and biting insects. Another theory suggests sexual selection played a role. Visible skin may have become a canvas for social signaling, health, youth, and status. Smooth skin could indicate fewer parasites or diseases, making individuals more attractive mates. Thus, the loss of fur wasn't just biological, it was social and aesthetic, a prelude to the later cultural importance of clothing. Yet as evolution stripped away our fur, it forced our species to adapt in other ways. Nakedness made us vulnerable to cold, to the elements, and to shame. The invention of clothing then can be seen as both a continuation and a correction of this ancient evolutionary gamble. The ice comes climate change and the birth of clothing. Around 200,000 to 180,000 years ago, the world entered one of the coldest periods in human prehistory, the marine isotope stage 6, a global glaciation that drastically altered the environment. Africa's lush landscapes shrank into arid savannas and deserts. Northern latitudes became icy wastelands. Humanity's survival hung by a thread. This is the moment when archaeology suggests clothing was born. Genetic studies of human lice provide one of the most surprising clues. Scientists discovered that clothing lice, Pediculus humanus, diverged from head lice, Pediculus humanus capitis, around 170,000 years ago, indicating that humans had started wearing something consistently enough for lice to evolve to live in it. This microscopic detail offers powerful evidence garments were no longer temporary hides for warmth. They were now a permanent part of human life. What drove this transformation? The cold was the immediate catalyst. As humans migrated into harsher climates, the Middle East, Central Asia, and eventually Ice Age Europe, exposure to freezing temperatures became deadly. Without fur, survival depended on invention. Animal skins, stripped, scraped, and sewn with bone needles, became the earliest clothing. But clothing wasn't just about warmth. It represented the birth of symbolic thinking, the ability to manipulate materials for abstract purposes. To create clothing, one had to plan, process, and imagine, to see beyond the immediate present. In a sense, the needle and thread were as revolutionary as the first fire. The first fashion revolution. Skins, fibers, and identity. Archaeological finds from various regions reveal that clothing evolved differently across the globe. In colder areas, people relied on animal hides and furs. In more temperate regions, early humans experimented with plant fibers, bark, and grass to weave rudimentary coverings. The oldest known tools associated with clothing, bone needles, date back about 40,000 years. found in Siberia and later across Europe and China. Their fine craftsmanship implies that humans were not only stitching hides but also tailoring garments to fit specific body shapes. This marks the birth of fashion as technology, clothing as a designed, purposeful artifact rather than mere protection. Over time, clothing acquired deeper meanings. Among Neanderthals, who also lived in icy climates, hides and furs were likely used, though their clothing appears to have been less fitted and more draped. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, began personalizing their attire with ornamentation, shells, pigments, and beads. This was a profound shift. Garments became tools of identity and communication. Clothing started to express tribal belonging, social hierarchy, and spiritual belief. In this sense, the act of dressing became an early form of storytelling, a wearable declaration of who we were, where we came from, and what we believed. Thus, the first garments were more than protection against the cold. They were the first mirrors in which humanity saw itself, IV. From function to symbol, the dawn of modesty in culture. As humans began to live in larger groups, the meanings of clothing deepened. Anthropologists believe that modesty, decoration, and ritual soon became intertwined with the act of dressing. Early societies developed taboos and customs surrounding nudity. Covering the body may have helped delineate private from public life, adulthood from childhood, and sacred from profane. The biblical story of Adam and Eve, though written much later, captures a universal truth. The moment humans became aware of their nakedness was the moment they became self-conscious beings. In ancient societies such as Mesopotamia and Egypt, clothing quickly became a symbol of status and power. The wealthy wore fine linen and colored dyes, while laborers dressed in coarse fabrics. The materials one wore reflected access to resources, technology, and trade networks. For example, in ancient Egypt, linen, light and breathable, was both a practical response to the desert climate and a marker of civilization. In colder Eurasia, animal hides evolved into fur-lined cloaks and boots, precursors to later luxury symbols. This cultural evolution of clothing paralleled the growth of civilization itself. From the earliest tribes to the grand empires, garments became woven into religion, politics, and art. Each stitch carried meaning of labor, identity, and hierarchy. The hidden consequence: clothing and human evolution. While clothing shielded us from the elements, it also altered our biology. Once humans began to rely on external coverings, our bodies no longer needed to maintain as much natural insulation. Over millennia, this likely contributed to changes in body fat distribution, skin sensitivity, and hair patterns. Furthermore, clothing indirectly influenced sexual selection once again. In many societies, what was concealed became eroticized, creating a new dimension to human attraction. In this way, garments reshaped not only our culture but our psychology. Perhaps most importantly, the invention of clothing allowed humans to expand their range. Protected from freezing climates, our ancestors migrated into Europe, Asia, and beyond. The spread of humanity across the globe, from Arctic tundras to tropical jungles, was only possible because of our artificial skin. Clothing, in effect, made us the first truly global species. The textile revolution, weaving civilization fast forward to around 10,000 years ago, as the Neolithic revolution transformed hunter-gatherers into farmers. With the domestication of plants like flax and animals like sheep, clothing entered a new era: textile production. Spinning and weaving technologies emerged in ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. Early looms produced woven fabrics that could be dyed, embroidered, and traded. Textiles soon became a cornerstone of economies, often as valuable as metals or grain. The textile trade connected early civilizations across continents. Egyptian linen, Chinese silk, and Indian cotton became legendary goods, circulating along the Silk Road and shaping global history. Clothing was no longer just survival gear. It was a medium of wealth, technology, and empire. The shift from hides to woven fabric represented a new kind of mastery over nature. Instead of killing animals for warmth, humans now cultivated plants and domesticated animals for fiber, an early example of sustainable innovation. The psychological shift: clothing and the self beyond material progress. Clothing transformed human psychology. The moment we dressed, we began to perceive ourselves through the eyes of others. Clothes became a form of social armor, shaping how individuals presented their identity and status. Anthropologists and psychologists describe this as the birth of the extended self. Our garments became extensions of our bodies, expressions of personality, morality, and belonging. From ritual costumes to royal robes, from warrior armor to priestly vestments, clothing externalized inner values. In time, clothing helped define gender roles, professional identities, and social hierarchies. What we wore became what we were, a concept that persists even in the modern world. Science meets story. what the evidence tells us, despite the deep history of clothing, physical remains of early garments are rare, they decay quickly. Most of what we know comes from indirect evidence tools, art, and microscopic clues. Bone needles 40,000 years old in Siberia and Europe show complex sewing practices. Textile impressions on ancient pottery in Georgia 34,000 years old reveal early weaving. Lice DNA timelines confirm clothing existed at least 170,000 years ago. Paleoclimate records show temperature drops coinciding with the rise of clothing use. Together, these clues tell a consistent story. Clothing was a technological adaptation to changing climates. But it quickly became something much more profound. The cultural leap from simple hide to symbolic attire marks one of the most defining transitions in human evolution, akin to the mastery of fire or the invention of language. The legacy of the first garments, clothing's invention rippled across millennia, influencing not only survival but creativity, trade, and art. From the beadwork of Ice Age artisans to the robes of Egyptian pharaohs, garments became canvases for expression and meaning. Even today, fashion carries echoes of this ancient shift. We still use clothing to signal belonging, to impress, to protect, and to define ourselves. Beneath the trends and fabrics, there remains that primal instinct to create a second skin that tells the story of who we are. The moment we dressed was the moment we became more than animals. We became storytellers, wearing our identity on our sleeves. Conclusion: the second skin that made us human, the invention of clothing, was more than a practical response to the cold. It was a cognitive revolution. It reflected our species' ability to adapt, imagine, and symbolize. It bridged biology and culture, nature and artifice. From the first scraped hide to the tailored suit, every garment carries within it a lineage that stretches back to a shivering ancestor 170,000 years ago, somewhere in a dark Ice Age night, wrapping themselves in fur for the first time. That moment, humble, desperate, and ingenious, altered the course of our history. Clothing did not just cover us, it defined us. It allowed us to survive, to travel, to express, and to dream. When humans got dressed, humanity itself was born.